Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Special thanks to our very distinguished panel today. Our topic is whether technology can beat climate change. As we know, climate change is accelerating. We're seeing more and more tragedies, more and more climate horrors coming faster and faster, getting larger and larger. In my American home state of Oregon, we saw temperatures at 120 degrees Fahrenheit this summer. Something is getting worse very quickly. On the other hand, we have technology that is also moving faster. But is the technology moving fast enough for us to solve the climate change problem in time to keep the damages to a minimum? So that's the basic theme that we have today. I saw a little piece in the New York Times a couple weeks ago. They had the path of emissions under before COP, after COP, on the COP25, even further, the emissions path under current government commitments. None of them get to net zero. Okay? We'll see what comes out of COP26 that's happening now. But the key thing is that we have to rely on our own technology. We have to push things ourselves. We have to figure it out and get there because we're not going to get any help. So that's why I wanted our distinguished panelists, who are very, very closely involved in this issue of diffusion of technology, to join us today. So if we can start, the first issue that I'd like to ask our panelists is on the diffusion of technology, or how can we accelerate the diffusion of technology? How do we make it go faster? So if we could start, Patricia, you've had a lot of experience in this. How do you get things to move faster? 3 minutes. Thank you.
Well, it's a big question, but I think that what I would like to start from is that we have an urgent situation to beat climate change today. That's what the topic is. So innovation is a tool that we need to use. But the fact is we have all of the solutions in hand. We actually know how to beat climate change. Frankly speaking, net zero only gets us to 3 degrees. So we not only have to beat climate change, we have to go beyond the current Paris Accord agreement, and we have to get below it. But the good news is that this is not going to be done just by governments. It's going to be done by people like everyone in this room and like innovators, on the panel today, because we're going to take the existing technology, what we know how to do today, we're going to look at it critically and say, what's wrong with it? And I'll use it as an example, a coal-fired energy generating plant. If we can change the fuel, capture the emissions, we suddenly have a biomass energy generating plant. If we can look at the sources of the biomass and make sure that they're truly sustainable and circular, then we can solve the problem of sustainability and deforestation, because there's lots and lots of biomass out there that is actually creating more methane emissions and needs a job. So harness the right stuff to make the electricity. And then look at the ash that you're generating, incorporate that into the food production capability, create enhanced efficiency fertilizers using it with new patents and technologies around fertilizers. And then you can also help to solve the food crisis. And at the same time, you can use all of that together to help eliminate a lot of the toxic groundwater pollution that happens around things like coal-fired generation. So looking at the technology we've got and the know-how we have, using the equipment that's in place, and bolting on the innovation that is going to be the new stuff to fix the problems of the old systems. It's kind of like a metaphor of using the old John Deere tractor. If you have to plow the field, let's change the fuel, make the John Deere fuel efficient and emissions free, but make sure we're still producing the food we need. So I think that is really how we're going to disseminate the technology, is by attaching it to existing know-how and getting everybody involved with this. Looking at everybody, creating access to the information and the education about the new stuff that's coming out. And this is where the digital age is going to help us. And really being open, sharing, and collaborative in how we talk about fixing old problems. That's where I'd start.
Okay, thanks. Mitsuru, could you have been a genius in spreading technology at a very fast pace. What are some of your pieces of advice about how to spread innovation quickly?
Thank you very much for giving me the great opportunity for sharing my thoughts and ideas. And first of all, I'm really encouraged and excited your Bader-Johnston's idea. We have already had enough technology change the current dirty asset that is emitting a huge amount of carbon dioxide into the eco-friendly green facility. We already have enough power and technology as well. But at the same time, I am an entrepreneur, and Euglena Corporation is a startup, Japanese startup venture company. The mission all startup and venture company has is to turn zero into one. So we still we have realized the Japanese first mass cultivation of Euglena. The mass cultivation of Euglena was still regarded as impossible by 2005, and we became the first company to succeed in the commercial scale mass cultivation of Euglena at that time. And this year, we make the airplane fly by Euglena biojet fuel, not crude oil. We fly the real airplane by a sustainable aviation fuel. So the mission and objective of the startup is turn zero into one. And we are still running at the bioventure company and encouraged the Bader-Johnston's idea. And I want to try to make another great deal and achievement and promote this successful case to the world.
Eriko, what about from your point of view?
Thank you. Firstly, I'm very honored to speak with the panelists today as well. And I'd love to share a little bit of context. So I am an ESG-minded investor, and so I'm not purely focused on climate tech or green tech, but I think that's precisely the perspective I'd love to share. So to accelerate new technologies, and my perspective is more from new technologies, whereas Patricia mentioned accelerating the use of existing technologies. So for the new technologies and this new industry to boom, I'd love to mention a very soft point first. So the literacy and the literacy competency, which was mentioned today in the earlier morning session by Audrey Tan, of these types of technologies, the climate issue in itself is very important, I think, and we're still in the early stages. And I might point out that in Japan, it's a little bit even lower, the literacy in general, in the general public, even in the technology sector, of how much we really need to do. So Mr. Feldman, Dr. Feldman today really made a compelling case in the very beginning, how it's really an urgent issue. But I think in Japan, we really don't have that awareness yet. So as a VC investor, we invest in relatively early stage companies compared to companies like Euglena. And so we would really like to encourage more and more startups, technology companies to work in this field. And we would like to generate more media attention, more culture around this issue so that more and more talented people would want to work in the climate tech space. And so, for example, one of our first investments at MPower was a climate tech software company. So it was not necessarily an energy-related company per se, but it was a climate risk analysis company. And they have been hiring the top smartest engineers out of Stanford, Harvard, et cetera, to work on this problem. And I think this is a US company that we invested in, but we would love to see more of this happen in Japan. So I'd really like to emphasize a little bit more about the literacy, the education aspect of this issue.
Can I follow up really quickly? In Japan, are those talented people coming to Japan to work here?
Yes, that's a great question. That would be our wish. So I know a lot of cross-sector public and private partnerships are going on right now. So I know the Ministry of Environment in Japan is doing a startup innovation award system. They've done that last year, pioneered that. They're doing that again this year. So that is in works. There's other programs such as the JETRO trying to access global companies, global talent to come work with Japanese corporations. Because as you know, in Japan, there is a really great foundation proliferation of large corporates now wanting to incorporate more and more sustainable solutions, clean tech solutions in their core businesses.
Thanks very much. I think one of the biggest successes in Japan has been the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, which has brought talent from around the world, unbelievable talent from around the world. And it was organized in a way that would ensure that the balance between foreign and Japanese talent would be equal, and that they could give a good climate for people to work in. So again, we'll get back to the jinsai, or the human aspect in a minute. But I'd like to turn back to Euglena for a minute, because one of the most important things I'm worried about in climate change is food supply. Okay, so energy, food, all sorts of things are sort of, all connected. So if I could ask Mitsuru to talk a little bit more about how you got Euglena started, the areas that you're operating in, and what is some of the cross-fertilization between the energy, the food, and the other products, the healthcare products that you're making?
Yeah, of course. I'd like to talk about first the amount of carbon dioxide emissions in the country from the food sector and transportation sector first. In Japan, according to the latest paper and analysis, we emitted 1.1 billion tons of carbon dioxide yearly, and 200 million tons of which are emitted from the transportation and food industries as well. Incidentally, Japan's total forest area is 25 million hectares, and 25 million hectares trees and forests can absorb carbon dioxide. 200 million carbon dioxide can absorb by the effect of photosynthesis. So the same amount, 200 million, emit from the food industry and the transportation sector, and absorbed by trees. And more interestingly, emit twice, 400 million of carbon dioxide is emitted from the electricity producing sector. So we need the eco-friendly food products and biofuel as well. And firstly, when I visit Bangladesh in the first grade of the University of Tokyo, and I saw the real poverty and malnutrition problem there. And I decided to solve the malnutrition problem in developing countries first. And after, when I came back to Japan, and I devoted myself to the research project of Euglena, and came to know what Euglena is. And Euglena has a wide range of nutrients, and it's perfectly fit for the human being consumption and solving the malnutrition problem. Because Euglena has a wide range of nutrients, 59 varieties of nutrients. Euglena can produce animal proteins and vegetable vitamins as well. And very eco-friendly way cultivated Euglena in the pond, not the farmland, and 50 times amount of vitamins, animal proteins, dietary fiber. When you take Euglena dry powder, you intake 50 times condensed vitamins and nutrients you can take. That's a point. That's the first point I'm interested in the cultivation of Euglena. And next, according to the raising the awareness of importance of producing renewable biofuel since 2010, and I started the research project for producing biofuel, not the battery. I'm focusing on the producing sustainable biofuel. And eventually, this year, we realized the first jet fuel flight in Japan.
Okay, very good. You mentioned the nutrition aspect of Euglena as a wonderful, wonderful food source. How much how much energy will we be able not to use for other food sources if Euglena is used more broadly?
Yeah, that's a very important point. When we make 1 kilogram Euglena dry powder, and at the same time you want to eat 1 kilogram animal protein from the cow, pigs, and chicken, and 100 times water and carbon dioxide emitted from the process of producing cow, pigs, and chicken as well. Their agriculture and they are needing a huge amount of water and they emit carbon dioxide compared to the cultivation of microalgae Euglena. Euglena doesn't have, Euglena is a microorganism. It's just single-celled, without leaves, without seed. It's just a leaf. And it can be doubled by the power of photosynthesis, very conveniently and useful and efficiently doubled in only a day if the weather is fine and Euglena can absorb the enough amount of sunlight. The amount of Euglena can be doubled in only a day. So the efficiency of producing, especially animal protein, is the most effective way is to cultivate Euglena.
Okay, thanks very much. One of my great lessons from studying the food chain was that the amount of grain that it takes to produce a pound of beef is about 10 to 1. For pork, it's about 4 to 1. For chicken, it's 2 to 1. But we could replace all that protein with Euglena and other sources at a much, much lower cost. So I think that's a key element in the whole food energy nexus. Eriko, do you have a comment on this area?
Yes, thank you. Yes, it was really interesting to hear about all the things that Euglena does, from biofuels to food. And another point that I would love to share as a VC, we have a generalist approach at our fund. We're not a climate tech focused fund again. So this interdisciplinary focus is very important. So, there are solutions in one area and it might be difficult to commercialize just based on one area. But sometimes if you apply it to food, etc., or wellness, healthcare, then sometimes that technology can be much more commercialized faster. And so we love at my firm to use this approach. And we can see that in various other sectors as well. And another soft point, again, for this approach is that when you think about these new technologies, as a VC, we're quite strict on really does it, bring value to people aside from just the energy carbon emission reducing factor. It's very important, of course, because we have this climate agenda. But does it really make people healthier, or does it taste good? Is also another important factor. And I think having that kind of sharp mindset when we evaluate technologies is necessary. And to have that, I think we also need to have a good amount of data and information. So having that balance of really evaluating the technological aspect, but also about commercialization, is something I try to focus on.
Okay, thanks very much. Patricia, can I turn to you now because you're focused in some of your investment activities in the ammonia-hydrogen connection. Ammonia, of course, is extraordinarily important for fertilizer and food. But could you tell us a little bit about what you're doing in those areas and then where you see the prospects for a more efficient and production method for ammonia? We know that Haber-Bosch is very, very CO2 intensive. Are there better ways to do it? Are they developed? How do we spread them? And what is the connection to the climate change issue?
Okay, thank you. First, I would just like to say Izumo-san always makes me my heart warm at his mission. You know, how he started in refugee camps in Bangladesh, saw a problem, and then dedicated his life to solve it. It's absolutely amazing. And all of this is just, again, going back to my point that I think we need to be rooted in the present. There are currently 7.8 billion people on the planet. We're expecting there to be 10 billion people in the planet by 2050. Currently, we have enough food to feed all of those people. But if you think about it in terms of cows, there are currently 2 cows for every human being on the planet. So if we're projecting forward to feeding 10 billion people, how many cows are we going to need? And currently, livestock is taking up 60% more than any other form of biodiverse life on the planet. And it is one of the major causes of deforestation in areas like Brazil and around tropical rainforests. And it's just to feed the appetite for meat. So if we're looking for better protein sources, we need to have more efficient ways of growing food. And ammonia is one of the core fertilizers that has been used for over 100 years around the world. And in fact, we heard an interesting story from Dr. Feldman this morning, how Hitachi was already involved with using ammonia to separate out hydrogen fuel 100 years ago. And Haber-Bosch is a method that is used to catalyze the extraction of hydrogen from water. It's very, very carbon intensive. And currently, about 60% of the hydrogen that is produced using what is called a gray hydrogen method, which means that 60% of it is being used with coal-fired energy. Ironically, we're using coal-fired energy, which is 20% more carbon emissions in order to make gray hydrogen, which is a clean fuel, compared to something like Euglena. Okay? So the nonsense around some of this science is staggering. When we move into blue hydrogen, where you're taking, again, the same water and you're using the same Haber-Bosch method in order to create the electrolysis to split out the hydrogen, at least we're using CSS, carbon sequestration and storage technologies. And we're taking the same carbon, that 20% extra carbon, and we're putting it back in the soil. What you're getting basically is a zero-sum game, because there now you at least are just creating as much carbon emissions as a renewable energy source for making hydrogen would be. If you can move it into the next paradigm where you're talking about green hydrogen, which is the holy grail, you have to get away from Haber-Bosch because it's too expensive. Because using renewable energy in order to make enough hydrogen fuel is currently, I mean, you'd have to use, I think, the same land mass as the country of Norway for renewable energy like solar in order to power just Maersk's shipping line. Okay, with hydrogen fuel. So the scale and the scope of what's capable is where innovation is needed. There are actually patents that can replace Haber-Bosch, which can cut the electrolysis costs in half using renewable fuels. But this is a kind of innovation that needs to have the venture capital. That has to be the direction. And if we're going to be using gray hydrogen, then that means that we're going to perpetuate coal because it's the only possible way to make that cost effective. And if you just add on carbon sequestration and storage, you still haven't solved the basic problem of the scale of the production that is going to be possible from that without reducing carbon emissions. So really, this is the conundrum of hydrogen fuel economy. And I admire Japan very much for focusing on this as the sort of direction of the future, because actually ammonia itself is a really interesting area. Ammonia is a great fuel. It's 9 times more efficient for energy storage, for renewable energy, than lithium-ion batteries. So using ammonia for storage, using it for means to move hydrogen fuel around, it's much more efficient. And it's also something that can be produced much more locally and safer to ship. So as ammonia and hydrogen, as topics are very, very interesting because they bring the nexus of food, water, and energy together. And I think that when we talk about solving the current climate crisis, being in the present about what we can do now because we have, ladies and gentlemen, 9 years to make sure we can reach 1.5 degrees. We have to have all hands on deck, use what we've got, and throw out the old stuff that is just perpetuating the old issues. That means Japan has to transition out of coal. It has to move into blue hydrogen by replacing coal with at least biomass technologies. And it also has to really, really focus on innovating how do you catalyze the electrolysis to increase the efficiency of splitting out the hydrogen. And you have to focus on the storage in ammonia. And ammonia also has food implications as well, because when you apply the patents that exist right now, the technology is there in order to fix ammonia, to fix phosphorus, and to fix nitrogen. You can also solve the fertilizer runoff problem. You can solve the red algae blooms in the ocean. And we can also focus on the groundwater, which is often forgotten. The world is not a ball, it's a sponge. The groundwater runs underneath and is a shared resource around the planet. It knows no borders. Everything that runs off into the groundwater, we drink. It impacts everybody. So how food is grown, how the fertilizers are fixed, how they're applied, the efficiency of producing more food, plant-based food, to feed 10 billion people, because there is no way cows can feed 10 billion people. Not only is it impossible physically to have that many cattle roaming the range, if you go to mass beef production like the factory farms that have become the norm, particularly in the US, it is cruelty beyond imagination to other living beings. What we're seeing happening to poultry and to pigs and to cattle is beyond imagination. It's like a holocaust going on around us all the time. The sheer cruelty of our appetite for meat is staggering. And it's being driven by population. Currently, we have 75 million displaced people in the world. Refugees and people who have had to migrate because all of their income capability has disappeared because of climate change. The movement of people, the access to food, the fact that we have 3 months of stored food on the planet. If we have drought or famine in 4 different regions at the same time, we will run out of food as a planet in 3 months. So with that very cheerful note, I'll turn over my time, but I think we need to live in the present.
Okay, thanks very much.
And may I jump into this point?
Of course, please.
That's a very important point. And there are so many misconceptions about the word ammonia. Someone is not interested in that kind of word. And the differences among the blue hydrogen and green hydrogen, they don't care sometimes. But this is a very important point. And I am strongly confident to focusing on biofuel, not the battery, as I said. This is because the batteries are so energy hungry. Batteries are too low in energy density. You may know, or compare the energy content of a liter of biofuel that of the same kilogram of batteries. A kilogram of the most powerful and modern lithium-ion based battery has only 100 watts hour of power, but a liter of biofuel, gasoline, crude oil based gasoline, diesel fuel, and sustainable aviation fuel, biofuel we produce has 10,000 watts power or 100 times more energy than the battery crude oil or biofuel has. To put it another way, a battery with the same energy as gasoline is 100 times heavier than gasoline. So electric planes will not be a reality in 100 years. And the most important point is the evidence. So we need to know more about the total emission of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases, including ammonia and other greenhouse gases and total LCA emission of carbon dioxide, we have to care and pay attention more.
I'd like to turn next to finding, evaluating, and spreading new ideas and ask Eriko to talk a little bit about that. And in your comments, if you could, go back to the point that Patricia mentioned about patents. My question is our current patent system hurting our ability to spread technology quickly? So, Eriko.
Great, thank you. I would leave it to Patricia about the patent point, but I'd love to talk in general about finding and evaluating new ideas. So again, I'll start with quite a soft concept. So I like the approach of first being very holistic, and I'll explain a little bit more about why and what that means, and also interdisciplinary. So again, there's various types of clean tech technology that you heard today, whether it's biofuels to green hydrogen, et cetera. But again, this interdisciplinary approach I think is very important. And so for a fund like us, we approach it in a way that there are experts in the field that we have as advisors, whether it's in the technology field, in the bioscience field, but also AI scientists, data scientists that we talk upon to get their insights. And that's really crucial because if there's a technology but that's hard to commercialize, we won't be able to see the benefits of that because it needs to scale and it really needs to reach people for it to have an impact on the environment. So the interdisciplinary aspect we find very important. And that also encompasses different ideas from across the world. So we look at companies globally, even though a majority of our investments will be in Japan. We look at companies in Southeast Asia, India, et cetera. So we really truly have that approach of innovation really can come from anywhere. And we try to have an open mindset. Another point I'd like to emphasize about holistic is that these climate technologies, it's quite difficult truly to assess. I'm still learning. But what that means is there are pros and cons for each approach. There's opportunity cost. So as Patricia mentioned, it's very odd in this segment where some things are touted as green or carbon neutral, carbon positive. But when you look into it, when you consider the supply chain aspect, how do you ship that to one sector to another, one region to another, holistically, sometimes it's not carbon neutral or carbon positive. So we really try to look at all the approaches, make sure we're doing our calculations properly. And that's not easy. And again, we do that through combining a lot of experts in the field and having these open discussions. So that's one way. Another one is it's a little bit of a different point, but we as an ESG fund like to look at the ESG aspect of the business itself. So even if it is a clean tech company and doing great things in terms of carbon neutrality, sometimes we found that those companies themselves are not really thinking about their own emissions. And so they're producing great technologies to reduce emissions, but sometimes they're not thinking about, okay, how can they reduce their carbon footprint in their operations? Or even the S side, how can they further promote employee social well-being? And we think that's important going forward for all companies. And so we really look at that when evaluating new companies.
Okay, very good. Other panelists, do you have your own comments on the issue of finding, evaluating, and then spreading technologies?
Yeah, Dr. Feldman, so could you share the great ideas for improving the productivity for the many times the discussion, and so the discuss equally to the spread people. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, could you share that?
Thanks. We were talking before the thing. One of my favorite books for the last 5 years is a book called Social Physics. The Japanese translation is Sousharu Butsurigaku. It's published in Japanese too. This is from a professor at the MIT Media Lab named Alex Pentland. And he's a big data professor, and he has done many projects and works and consulting with many companies. One of my students at Tokyo Rikadai, Tokyo University of Science, was in one of his projects. What he does is he looks at how people communicate with each other. He has a sensor tag you put on people. He traces emails, he traces phone calls, he traces individual conversations, everything to look at who's talking to who inside the company. His result was very interesting. He has a little, call it a structure, where he says, okay, effective teamwork comes from 3 things: talk a lot. Everybody's got to talk a lot. Second, people have to talk equally. There cannot be any, skew in how much people talk. And third, you need outside information, okay? That is, every team member has to bring in information from the outside. Professor Pentland says that the individual quality of the people on the team is not as important as the communications among them. So I think all of our panelists have mentioned the importance of people talking to each other more. But this is a fascinating result. And I think in spreading technology, bringing these extra dimensions of how we talk to each other is very important. If I can give a little example, in my ZEMI, the graduation paper seminar for my students last year, one of them was using this idea to improve innovation inside his company. He's in his mid-40s. He noticed that the numbers of innovation, new ideas in his company was kind of going down. The young folks were just kind of sitting there not doing things. And so he decided to look at how people were communicating. He developed a very simple method, not using sensors, just to look at a meeting and see who's talking. Then quietly, in secret, he did it inside our seminar. And then he showed us all the results. He drew the diagram. Turns out one guy was talking too much. Ooh, that was me, okay? So when he presented that result, I said, okay, I'm going to shut up. I will talk last. Everybody else talked first. And sure enough, we had more ideas, we had less skew, and that paper won the Best Paper Award for the year. Okay? So I would encourage people to read the social physics book because it gives lots of ideas about how people can share ideas. And it is that sharing that causes the new ideas to come out. So that's what he's referring to.
Yeah, thanks for that. And so do you know where is the best place to do innovations? I believe that the university and college is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because in Japan, the last year, there are 130,000 new venture companies, startups, and SMEs are funded last year. And in Japan, currently there are 800 universities, colleges, and national research institute are there all over Japan, and set up the venture and startup companies. The number is reached around 3,000. The precisely 2,905 startup venture companies are originated from the university and colleges and the National Institute for Research. And in these startups, 11 ventures are becoming the unicorns. The market size is over 10 billion or US dollar. They are coming from the only 2,905 venture startups. The last year, we created a new company, 130,000, but no unicorns are born from the SMEs from all over Japan. So I mean, and I strongly recommend that the venture capitalists, VCs, they have to pay attention more and invest a lot to the startups, venture companies originated from the university, because the university is the best place to talk a lot, discuss more, and meet the diversified people, professors, students as well, and a perfect place for improving, shape the new idea for achieving SDGs as well.
Okay, thanks very much. Before we go into Q&A, if I can just add 2 points. One is that one of my current students at Tokyo University of Science is writing a graduation paper on how to connect local universities to their communities better and get more innovation, therefore accelerate productivity. So when he's done with the paper, I'll send you a copy. Everybody else wants it, that's fine. Pardon? Oh, sure, yeah.
I think that one thing is unique about the time we find ourselves in now is that the purpose of companies is shifting, where young people tend to be more focused on solve a problem or find a problem and solve it, or find a solution, versus find a customer. And I think that if you look at the old venture capital of Silicon Valley model, where you want to see the customer, be able to sell them anything and everything and get out quick, make as much money as you can and exit early. I think that young entrepreneurs are now much more mission focused. And so in order to share mission and to identify real problems and then to pool their ideas for finding the solutions is not only very motivating for them, it's also really essential for the planet. Like in order to tackle and beat climate change, we're going to have to be much more mission focused, like the Izumo-sans of the world, as opposed to the Silicon Valley approach, where we're creating companies in order to chase profit. And that really is, in terms of sharing ideas, I think a really, really rich forum for collaboration. And that's the best way. Everybody can understand what the problem is, but identifying very specific problems that are not overwhelming and then piling on with solutions and brainstorming that is something that is actually more productive than trying to solve the huge problems, all on our own. And I think that those kinds of discussions are really, really productive.
Okay, if I can recommend one other book before we go to Q&A, that's a book called Lonely Ideas. It's about science and technology in Russia by a historian, brilliant book. As we all know, Russia has some of the world's absolute best mathematicians, best scientists, best engineers. The ideas don't spread, at least not inside Russia. Why not? The book discusses it. It's called Lonely Ideas. The author is named Lauren Graham. And what he comes up with is a model of innovation. And he goes into, idea after idea, technology after technology that was invented in Russia, never spread. Paris is known as the City of Light because of a Russian invention of the arc lights that was adopted in Paris, never made it in Russia. They just weren't interested. Why? Okay, so the little model he has in there about why ideas do or don't spread is very, very interesting to take a look at. So let me leave you with that book too, and I'd like to go now into Q&A. As said before, please limit your questions to 30 seconds. It's hard, I know, it's hard. 30 seconds, please. Also, we'll take 3 questions at once, direct them to the panelists, and then we'll take another bunch, and then from the web, we'll get some questions as well. So, Q&A. Terasawa-san, onegaishimasu. Oh, whoops, sorry. Mr. Terasawa, please.
I have a question to Patricia, 2 questions. You mentioned the importance to decarbonize coal-fired power plants. Can you elaborate on how to decarbonize coal-fired power plants in a pragmatic manner? The second question is that I heard you stressing the importance of biomass. What are the materials or raw materials that you consider to produce biomass? Can we produce biomass in Japan, or do we have to import biomass from somewhere else?
Thank you. Great questions. Actually, to decarbonize coal, my suggestion is to transition out. And currently, there are products like a product that's patented in the UK and in production right now in the state of Maine in the US called Coal Switch, where you can take agricultural waste and other woody biomass, make it into black pellets that actually sort of crush down into exactly the same consistency as coal, and they can completely replace coal without changing the plant. That would be, to me, the way to do it, is to harness those technologies of finding replacements for coal. That is currently produced in the US, and so shipping obviously adds a carbon footprint. But your question, could that be produced in Japan? Absolutely, why not? Because there's a lot of agriculture, a lot of woody biomass out of the rice fields, out of managed forests. There's a huge amount of forest residue that needs to find a better use, that actually makes healthier forests. We don't have a forest fire issue in Japan because it's obviously quite wet, but there is a lot of woody biomass that's underutilized here, and that could be pelletized and used as a replacement. The problem there is just the scale of the sheer quantity, because coal-fired plants take so much, and that's why we use coal, because it's cheap. But there are actually sources of large-scale sources of woody biomass, like, for instance, the California almond orchards, where they have over 11 million hectares of almond trees that have to be cycled every 16 years. And because the wood isn't suitable for lumber, it's literally ground up and then put back in the soil, where it takes it a long time to decompose. It creates more emissions and is actually very, very detrimental to the soil health. That could be completely repurposed and applied in Japan and could be pelletized to make it suitable for coal-fired plants. And there's enough of it to probably serve a number of coal-fired facilities. So to transition to the other option for coal is to use carbon sequestration and storage. And there are a number of really excellent technologies out there to do that. And I think Japanese companies are actually among the best at some of those CSS solutions. So that's the only other way. I mean, if you're going to fire coal, how you burn the coal as well, now it's mostly gasification, so the coal isn't actually burned. And so, again, the scrubbing and the technology within the plant is something that's probably not very well understood, and better education about how coal is used is the other thing. But the source of coal is the other problem. Coal as an extraction industry causes deforestation, is devastating to the areas where it's actually sourced. If you ever travel to Mongolia and you see the coal-producing areas there, I mean, it's like hell. I couldn't believe it. And if you live in a city where coal fire is actually coal, real coal, the old Russian-style Soviet coal plants are in use. I was there on September 15th a couple of years ago, the day they turned on the coal fires, and the air turned black right in front of my eyes in about 30 minutes. No one in Japan would live in that situation. And yet, the coal-producing countries of the world continue to sell because there's a customer. And that's what I mean. It's not mission-driven. We're doing business for the wrong reasons. So in a sense, coal needs to be transitioned out. Biomass is a transitional step. Yes, most of it could be done in Japan, but it's going to have to be a global transition, a collaborative. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, can we get a few more questions? I need 3 questions. I did a bad job.
So may I add?
You want to?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
In terms of the outcome of amount of the biomass, it's perfectly relying on the amount of the solar power and carbon dioxide itself. So I can't say that Japan is the perfect place for producing biomass and biofuel as well. The perfect place is on the equator, and very close to the coal fire plant is the perfect place because coal fire plant emit a huge amount of carbon dioxide. It's roughly in the air. Normal air contains the 400 ppm carbon dioxide only, but the coal fire plant emit 12%, 300 times condensed carbon dioxide is emitted from the coal fire plant. So if we set up the biomass cultivation facility very close to the coal fire plant on the equator, that is a perfect place. Therefore, the company's Euglena cultivation factory is located in Okinawa, Ishigaki Island, the most southern part of Japan, because we need a huge amount of sunlight. And the next pilot plant is located in Mie Prefecture, very close to the tube power plant, biomass power plant, emit the gas, and we use and capture the emitted gas and trap into the cultivation or liquid cultivation pool, and we use the disposal thermal power and emitted gas as well. And we recycle it and reduce the emitted gas, and we recycle improve the efficiency of the thermal efficiency and the usage as well. So the point is the sunlight and the amount of carbon dioxide is essentially needed for discussing the biomass.
Eriko, do you have any comments on this?
No, I'm okay.
No? Okay, very good. More questions? I need to take 3 at once. So 1, Anybody else? Two? Did I see a hand over here? One. Start with one then.
Okay. So thank you, panelists. So you touched upon this earlier, but can you expand on how we can address the irony regarding how these new technologies that solves climate change actually uses resources that in one way or another contributes to the problem?
Patricia?
I'm not sure if I'm completely understanding what your question is, but like, for instance, a technology like Bitcoin, for instance, that is using a huge amount of energy in order to...
Perhaps solar energy, which uses a lot of batteries, which I think lithium ion, the mining itself, the harvesting the energy to create it, is somehow contributes to the climate change.
So the whole supply chain for the
Yeah.
different.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, for instance, with solar power, if it's it all right, I think that solar cell technology is moving along very, very quickly. And right now, where the main resource that's being used is silicon. And so it's going to transition, actually, because now there's different technologies like perovskites and using different kinds of non-silicon, silicate-based materials. And they're going to become much more integrated with building materials in the very, very near future. In fact, you can already embed them into windows, into walls, onto roofing tiles. If we were really serious about leveraging solar power, we wouldn't be looking at using agricultural land anymore to cover them with solar panels. We'd be looking at integrating them into building materials. So those kinds of things, there is an irony where you have to make the mistakes in order to fix them. But solar power is one thing that is so valuable. I mean, in a single day, there's enough solar insolation to power the entire planet. So if we can capture it in better ways and use it in the application of that technology and where we use it is probably the biggest problem right now. You know, large solar farms is great in a desert, but it's probably not so effective in a country like Japan. But there's ways to implement solar power. I'll let somebody else.
Eriko?
Thank you. If I could just add one point, thank you for bringing that up. I think another point we see is, just reduction in general in usage of all types of energy or resources is something we need to address. So a lot of the times I see new technology companies producing sustainable materials for sustainable apparel. But I think the new movement now, especially amongst, Generation Z, et cetera, is do we really need to buy even that sustainable materially produced apparel? So I think you're absolutely right in that kind of, mindset and mission-driven kind of mindset is also really important as well. So I'd love to see more of that. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Can we go to the online questions?
We have two questions online. The first question is by Sachiko Ozaki-san. The question is, Queen Elizabeth of the United Kingdom recently lamented that politicians only talk and do not act. And from your point of view, are the actions of the world leaders sufficient on environmental issues? In what way do you expect them to support the Greentech more?
That's the first one.
That's the first question. The second question is by Mr. Michael Jones. Eriko stressed the need for sustainable technologies to be attractive for end customers and to be sustainable when the entire supply chain is being considered. What are the current technologies that your firm is looking at?
Okay, very good. Can we start with world leadership? Are people, the leaders, doing enough? Who's doing well? Who's not doing so well? Patricia?
Well, I think that currently world leaders are putting economy over climate. And it doesn't match the current urgency of the situation. And unfortunately, our economic system is based on a GDP mentality, which means perpetual growth and a linear mindset. So until we get leadership globally that can think in terms of circularity and working within the means of the planet, there's always going to be a deficit. I'm not sure that I'm so hopeful that we can plan the problems. I actually am placing my hopes on the private sector, on public corporations and individuals and entrepreneurs who are going to, despite the world leadership, solve the climate crisis. That's kind of my take.
Others on the leadership issue?
There are so many people like the policy makers, entrepreneurs, business people, or scientists and researchers, they have own their mission and goal. As I mentioned, I, as an entrepreneur, my mission is to turn zero into the one and realize the great things and making it possible for achieving the new technology. So each person play their role for achieving the SDGs by 2030 is the most important thing. I don't care so who is the leader and who are saying about. And I'm really interested in the global mega trend. Bader-Johnston said the current economies are strongly relying on the GDP, but the transition from the greedy old-fashioned old-fashioned capitalism to the multi-stakeholder and social-oriented capitalism, we can follow the global mega trend, and I am very optimistic to realize it.
Okay. Eriko, can you talk a little bit about your firms, and then I want to leave a little time at the end for one idea, a to-do from each person, please.
Great, thank you. So I'll be quick. Thank you for the great question. I think it is challenging to find truly sustainable companies, but there's ways to look at it. So again, I mentioned, looking at the whole supply chain of the companies. And so, for example, a food tech company that, we've looked at in the past, we look at, of course, what kind of carbon emission reducing factors do they have if they are alternative protein sources. I know Patricia really mentioned a great, data-driven way of looking at this issue, which is very huge. So we would look at that, but we would also look at, their supply chain and again, what they are doing within their company. And then also, it's really important to look at it as a zero-based point of view when we analyze new technologies. Izumo-san said 0 to 1, but when we look at new technologies, I'd like to think of it as why are we eating anyways in the beginning? And there are many things that we've done as in terms of just tradition and by habit. We eat maybe 3 times a day in this developed, economy just because of habit, but does that really, is that really necessary for us as a developed nation? We are already getting the calories that we need, so can we reduce that? Why are we eating anyways? Is it more for a social reason? If that's so, then what are the technologies that address that? So we like to look at it holistically and really look for solutions that are truly kind of game-changing, because I think at this stage we really need those large ideas. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. One of the G1 points is that we should make proposals. Churchill used to say, action today. So what 1 or 2 actions would you propose that we do today? 30 seconds each. Patricia?
Grab a project. Look around. Choose one of the SDGs that's within your sphere. However small it might be, make your impact and solve that problem.
Okay, Mitsuru-san.
Investing more money and paying more attention to the Japanese startup venture companies and support their actions. Entrepreneurs is trying to. Thank you.
Eriko-san.
Thank you. So it's an extension of what the two said. So I would say take a portfolio approach, because investing in this space is not easy, and there are so many innovations happening. So again, like the solar panel, of course, one technology might become a little bit obsolete, but you can learn from it. But having a portfolio approach of 2 to 3 projects, et cetera, really balances out your risk. So I would really encourage that, even in your daily lives as well. So to try, multiple things at once and learn from it.
Okay, very good, thanks. We're at minus 11, 12 seconds. So please join me in thanking the panelists for their very insightful comments, and we'll move on to the next session. Thank you very much.